Did you know that the daily morning coffee you consume actually is a major source of deforestation across tropical ecosystems? Today on the Think Wildlife podcast, we are joined by Etelle Higonnet, the founder of CoffeeWatch, a watchdog NGO working towards making coffee more environmentally sustainable. We talk about how the coffee industry is driving environmental degradation and deforestation, escalating human elephant conflict, and causing human rights violations across India, Latin America, and even Central Africa. Ethel talks about how the coffee industry can become more environmentally sustainable and what Coffee Watch is doing in this regard. Do tune in and don't forget to subscribe to this podcast. Welcome, Etelle, to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on today to talk about the impact of coffee on conservation and the environment.
It's such a pleasure to be here with you.
What inspires you to first pursue a career in conservation and environmental justice?
That's a great question. I actually started my career in human rights, not so much in environmental work. I worked when I was younger for 12 years doing human rights documentation, mostly in war zones and post-conflict areas, places like Iraq and Lebanon and Sierra Leone and Liberia, Haiti, Guatemala, Mexico. And yeah, I thought, I want to be like a war crimes prosecutor. So I worked as an intern into war crimes courts and I worked at Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International. But, had this moment where I realized we're not going to have any human rights on a dead planet. And that shook me to my core. And I decided to kind of make a switch. And that's when I leapt over into the environmental space and I went to work at Greenpeace and became their research director in Southeast Asia after a while, and then worked at Mighty Earth, the National Wildlife Federation. And yeah, now I started this NGO called CoffeeWatch, which brings together human rights and environment. You could say I've married both of these passions.
So yeah, that segues well into my next question. So you had founded Coffee Watch last year. What was the driving inspiration behind this initiative, and what is your long-term vision for the organization?
Oh yeah, the reason I started Coffee Watch is because coffee is the number 6 driver of deforestation in the world. But that problem gets very little attention, almost no attention, actually. And I can understand, a lot of environmentalists are working on the other high-risk commodities that are even worse than coffee, which is what I used to do when I was at Greenpeace and Mighty Earth. At National Wildlife Federation, I worked a lot on the highest risk commodities, which are cattle, soy, palm oil, cocoa. But it just made me so perturbed, I guess you could say, over the years that I could see that nobody was really stepping up to work on coffee deforestation, even though it is number 6 of driving global deforestation. That's like not a small thing. It's not carrots, it's not small potatoes. It's a huge problem. And even if it's not as big as cattle, which is trashing forests, that's like the worst thing for forests in the world is probably cattle. Even if coffee is not as bad as cattle, it still needs our attention. We need to change this. And so my vision for Coffee Watch is that we will stop all deforestation for coffee in the whole world. That's my hope.
It's a common misconception that plantations such as coffee, cocoa, and palm oil can serve as substitute for natural ecosystems. For example, recently in Indonesia, some minister mentioned that palm oil plantations are forests because they have trees.
Why is this not the case? Why are monoculture plantations so harmful for biodiversity? And how severe is the impacts of coffee plantation on environmental degradation?
Okay, this is a fantastic question. I'm so glad you asked. If you have a coffee monoculture plantation and you compare that with a coffee agroforestry system, where you mix lots and lots of trees in with the forest and the coffee together, so it's kind of forest getting married to coffee. And people often call that shade-grown coffee or agroecological coffee or agroforestry coffee. If you compare those two, agroforestry coffee has double the carbon of monoculture coffee, and it has 19 times the biodiversity on average. This is not true for every single farm, and you can have even better agroforestry that's even a bigger win for carbon and for biodiversity. You can have kind of low energy, shoddy, lame agroforestry that doesn't have quite those same levels of benefits. But there's an immense difference for birds and bats and bees and all the small creatures and taxa that can thrive in agroforestry systems. Like, just to give you an example, in monoculture coffee, you tend to find maybe 61 bird species compared to, in an ideal shade-grown coffee system, 243 species of birds. So there's a huge difference, and that's just the diversity of species. That's not even the number. The numbers are way, way, way higher. And of course, agroforestry coffee is not even as good as a forest, a real forest. So there's a big difference between bad coffee, good coffee, and forest. People who think that coffee is a forest, especially monoculture coffee, they're just la la land. They're basically taking crack. Like, we should call them to ask them, what is your dealer's number? Because you're high as a kite.
Coming to the impacts of coffee on wildlife, one particular taxon I want to focus on are civets. So they're quite famous for producing the most expensive coffee in the world, which is coffee luwak. So can you just talk a bit about this coffee and why it's such a big issue for animal welfare?
I'm so glad you brought this up. I mean, because you can think about coffee generally as helping or harming biodiversity, right? Where you have like a monoculture, which is almost a food desert for birds and bats and insects, like butterflies and bees, or an agroforestry coffee system, which is like a buffet, a banquet, a 4-star restaurant for creatures, and it really helps bring back biodiversity and heal the earth with every cup, especially if you have agroforestry coffee that's linking different national parks or different forests and creating a kind of corridor for creatures to go back and forth, like a safe passage almost, But apart from coffee being able to help or harm biodiversity generally, there is that one specific kind of coffee that you talked about, that civet coffee, which is just atrocious for animal welfare. That's not like an accident or a diffuse harm that coffee is producing, where, accidentally people without realizing it are doing coffee that's hurting biodiversity. No. This is like a very specific targeted harm against animals. It really started in a different way, right? Where it was like looking for civets in nature and, feeding them coffee and hoping that they would poop it out and collecting that. But now it's been perverted as a system, and we essentially incarcerate these little civets into tiny cages in insalubrious, disgusting, filthy conditions. We trap them, we deprive them of their liberty, we basically torture them, we force feed them coffee. It's horrible. If you care about animals, this is like animal cruelty coffee par excellence. This is the definition of animal cruelty coffee.
So now moving on toward the Western Ghats of the southern India, where I think you have worked a little bit. A human-elephant conflict specifically is on the rise in this area, especially in the coffee plantation.
Why is this the case, and why are these plantations such a hotspot for human and elephant conflict?
Yeah, so I mean, moving from civets to elephants, we know that coffee encroaching in forests in Karnataka has led to human-animal conflicts, with the elephants really losing out. There's this amazing documentary called A God That Became a Menace, Elephants and the Coffee. And essentially, these students and this filmmaker made a documentary looking at the Nagarajole National Park and the large coffee estates that are around it in Kodagu and in the Western Ghats region, and really found that this fragile relationship between elephants and humans had been deteriorating dramatically because of coffee. It doesn't have to be that way, right? We don't have to be pro-elephant or pro-farmer. I think there are absolutely ways for humans and elephants to coexist, but the truth is that thus far, the coffee industry has not tried to create pro-farmer, pro-elephant coffee that's good for people and planet, good for farmers and forests. And so the coffee industry in India has actually been destroying elephant habitat. And basically, if you're drinking Indian coffee, there's a fighting chance you're drinking cruelty to elephants and destruction of elephant populations. And we can change that. I think we can absolutely change that, just like we can change the human rights outcomes for the workers who are also being deeply harmed. It's not just the forest, it's also the farmers who are getting a very, very bad bargain from the industry, these powerful industry players.
Before we talk about how coffee can be made better for biodiversity and elephant, I just wanted to touch upon the human rights aspects of coffee plantation. What are your concerns about human rights with the coffee industry?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that. This is a really vital question because coffee can be either good or bad for farmers and forests. It's not just an environmental question. It's obviously a human rights question too. We know that in India, thousands of families are trapped in debt bondage on plantations in southwest Karnataka. And I mean, on paper, that practice has been abolished in the 70s. But we know that there's just terrible human rights abuses with forced labor, extremely low pay that's actually like too low. It's illegally low. People can earn 100 rupees a day for a 14-hour shift, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, also like a violation of labor laws. And basically, they fall deeper and deeper into debt when they take loans out from their boss, and the boss can just keep increasing the interest rate. So then they're trapped like slaves. They're essentially enslaved. And then you do have some amazing groups, that are fighting for workers' rights, like the Adivasi Kugala Samanvaya Samiti, AHSS. They have helped like 1,500 bonded laborers leave plantations in Kodagu. And they've been really trying to defend people's rights, but some coffee estates are just vicious dens of debt bondage, and people are brutally physically abused, and threatened, and there are multiple very credible allegations of violence and intimidation against the leaders who are trying to fight for coffee workers' rights overall. Yeah, it's a very, very serious problem for many, many workers. And that's just in India. But, if we look at human rights abuses in other parts of the world, the coffee industry is abusing human rights all over. It's not just an Indian problem, it's a coffee problem. We see slavery and debt bondage in Brazil. We see extreme forms of child labor in Mexico. We found human rights abuses in coffee when we did an investigation in China. We found it in Mexico. We found it in Brazil. We found it in an investigation we did with partners in Colombia. The coffee industry is hurting human rights. And we can change that. We must change that.
So now coming back to how coffee can be made more sustainable for biodiversity and environment, there's a lot of these certification programs to that coffee plantations are sustainable for environment. How effective have these mechanisms been, and are there ways to improve these?
Yeah, I mean, I think that originally a lot of the certification schemes began with a good intention of trying to make coffee more sustainable. But let me be crystal clear. There is currently no certification in coffee that pays a living income for workers. None. Not a living income price for the farmers, not a living wage for the day workers that are like sprayers or pickers or whatever. Not a single certification pays a living income. And a living income is exactly what it sounds like. It is an income that you can live on. It is not a dignity income or a wealth income or a development income. It is a living income. It is basic. It is like your basic food, your basic medical care, your basic education. This is the minimum that people should be getting. And certifications do not pay that. That is an outrage. It is crazy. Fair trade doesn't pay that. Rainforest doesn't pay that. 4C doesn't pay that. Cafe practices doesn't pay that. What is going on? I'm sorry, that's just crazy. And then, a lot of the certifications, they do some things, but not others in a way that's really confusing and misleading and crazy. I think it's just cuckoo banana pants. Here's an example. Rainforest Alliance and Fair Trade do a lot on chemicals, but they're not organic. Like if organic is an A when it comes to chemicals, Fair Trade could be something like a B+, and Rainforest Alliance could be something like a B-. Why? That's nuts. That's nucking fucks. It's not right. They should be organic. Like, why are they not organic? And forget cafe practices and 4C, they're like not even close to organic. Okay, so that is just weird that the certification schemes do one thing but not another, or do something halfway but not the whole way. What are they doing? So we definitely know how to make good coffee. You can have coffee that is chemical-free, organic, that pays a living income. You can have shade-grown agroforestry coffee, right? Like if you have agroforestry shade-grown coffee that's in a good system as opposed to monoculture, you can slash 3/4 of the carbon footprint. Boom. So we know how to make good coffee. It exists. There are companies out there doing it. The certification schemes need to get with the program and start delivering that, I think, right? That makes sense to me intuitively.
So talk about the work CoffeeWatch is doing to promote deforestation-free coffee in Brazil and the EU.
Yeah. So we are trying to do investigations around the world to find and uncover and reveal abuses in the coffee industry, and then campaign to transform the industry and make it better. So we did an investigation into abuses in coffee supply chains in China with a wonderful local partner NGO, and then with also excellent allies in Mexico. We did an investigation into Mexican coffee, and then Brazilian coffee, and Colombian coffee. What we find is over and over and over again, workers being abused. And we are working right now on our deforestation reports. We are almost ready to launch our Brazil deforestation coffee report. We're working on Colombia, Indonesia, Vietnam. So we now can prove there are worker abuses all over in supply chains around the world, and there's deforestation for coffee all over. We have satellite maps that literally prove this and show where it's happening and how. And I think that's really part of our core mission at CoffeeWatch, is to ring the alarm, to shine the spotlight on the problems for people and for planet, for farmers and for forests. But we also have been trying to pressure consumer governments to change how they buy coffee. So we did a big report on how the US and Europe and the UK need to change their tariffs. I kind of think that a lot of the tariffs consuming countries are racist and colonialist. And they're designed to keep the global south, where coffee is produced, in poverty by putting tariffs on coffee that's transformed. So, like, let's say you wanted to sell me coffee and you're in India or Brazil or Colombia or Vietnam or Indonesia or Uganda or whatever, a coffee producing country, and I'm in Europe. Chances are, if you want to sell me green coffee, it's no problem. But if you want to sell me roasted coffee or decaf or pods or instant coffee, where you've done a lot of transformation, then the more you transform the coffee, the more I will create a tariff. So then in the end, you are so disincentivized to transform the coffee that you're stuck selling me the raw materials. And that's not where the value add lies. Right? The value added lies in the transformation, in the roasting, the pods, the instant, the decaf. So a lot of consumer countries have, in the global north, embraced essentially like racist colonialist tariffs. There's some good exceptions. Canada is awesome. Australia is awesome. Norway is awesome. So we definitely know that good tariffs are possible. So yeah, CoffeeWatch has been trying to ring the alarm on that and change that if we can. Inspire people to change that. Yeah. It's not just the producer countries that I think need to step up to fix abuses like slavery and bonded labor and deforestation. I think the consumer countries also have a huge role to play. They are making a lot of the money. They have to fund part of the solutions and change their tariffs, to make it fair.
What have been some challenges you have faced at CoffeeWatch, and how can individuals contribute? Because
Oh, yeah, we've faced a lot of challenges. It's very scary to fight with the big coffee industry. There are a lot of really powerful, big companies in coffee who have millions and millions and millions of dollars. And revealing abuses in their supply chains is quite terrifying. So it keeps me up at night. And doing investigations in the field is also kind of terrifying, because a lot of places where coffee is grown, these are not safe places to investigate at all. So it's really dangerous for our teams in the field, who are basically heroic. I think our ally NGOs that have helped us do field investigations deserve a medal for courage and bravery. So yeah, it is very, very hard and quite scary. I feel scared a lot, but I have decided to try to be as courageous as I can. And I think my team, they're just amazing people and they keep me going. So that's a really big challenge, I would say. And what is it that people can do? Oh my goodness, there's so much people can do. Well, for one thing, you could go check out our website. We created one-stop shop where you can sign petitions. These are mostly not our petitions. These are just good petitions that we found from wonderful NGOs around the world. And you can sign all those petitions, because every signature does help. Every signature counts. It sends a strong message to governments and industry when people sign petitions in large numbers that people are not okay with injustice and trashing forests and hurting farmers. And I think, we tried to make it easy for people to sign a lot of the coffee petitions by just putting them all in one place. So that's one thing folks can do. And people can follow us on social media. We have a CoffeeWatch account in Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn and Blue Sky and Twitter, et cetera, et cetera. And we try on social media to give people things that they can do regularly. So whenever there is a tweet people can send, or an action someone can take, or a petition or a letter, we try to post those. So if you follow us on social, then you'll just start to see all the cool things you can do to step up and be a ninja for sustainable coffee and be a hero for ethical coffee. But if you drink coffee, you can just change the coffee that you drink. Just try to do your research. You only have to do it one time. Take an hour out of your life and find a good coffee company that matches your values, your ethics. It changes really country to country, right? Because like the smaller, more ethical companies that are in India are not present in Uganda. The Ugandan ones don't get sold in Brazil, and the Brazilian ones don't get sold in Colombia, et cetera. So wherever it is that your listeners are, in Europe or India or whatever, if they go online and they research for 1 hour and they find an ethical coffee company that's like organic and living income, and that cares about people and planet and is traceable, direct trade, that cares about human rights and that does shade-grown agroforestry coffee, just like do that research, find that coffee, and then that can be your coffee of choice. That's what you order. You order it every month. You can even get extra and give it as presents to people for their birthday, or if you go to somebody's house as a little present, and you can tell the story, and explain like, oh, I love you. It's your birthday. Happy birthday. I got you this delicious, beautiful coffee that's making the world better with every cup, because I think that is aligned with your values too. I hope you like it. If you like it, it's awesome. And then in a way that makes you like an ambassador for ethical coffee. So you can vote with your wallet every time that you buy coffee. And you can, we also made on our website a list of all the films that you can watch. You can like host a screening with your friends and your family. If there's a film in there that resonates with you, there's a film about environmental harms in Indian coffee called Elephants in the Coffee, how the god became a menace. And there's also a film in our list of films that you can do screenings at home with your friends and family about worker abuse. It's called Korg's Bitter Brew. So yeah, we sort of curated all the films. You can watch them, you can share them, you can screen them with your friends. That's like powerful too. You can become an ambassador. So I think people should not feel despair and doom. Of course, I'm telling some bad news here about coffee's abuses, but people should feel their beautiful hope and power, that there's so much we can do together. And together, we are strong. The industry might have millions of dollars, but we have millions of people who care about human rights and the planet. And I think that's better and stronger and more beautiful.
To end the podcast in a more positive note, what have been some of your best memories from your environmental career during your time at CoffeeWatch?
Oh, yeah. Honestly, I'm really a glass half full person, or since we're talking about coffee, you could say a mug half full person. I have seen and been a part of some hugely beautiful winning campaigns for the environment in my previous jobs at Greenpeace and Human Rights Watch and Amnesty and Mighty Earth. And I've seen that we can win when we are strong. When activists get together, we can change the world. I totally believe that we can improve coffee and transform the industry. I am in it to win it. And I'm very hopeful and very positive. And, here, I'll just give one example of something that I played a tiny role in when I was at Greenpeace, but that gave me a lot of hope. When I was at Greenpeace, I was in Greenpeace Southeast Asia, where I served as a consultant and then a research director. I got a front row seat to how Greenpeace and many other NGOs collaborated together and transformed the palm oil industry. And deforestation for palm oil has gone down, 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 down. It's amazing, right? But also the human rights situation for palm oil got better. There were big exposés on rape and sexual and gender-based violence and child labor and forced labor, and the palm oil industry cleaned up its act a lot. I am not saying the palm oil industry is perfect. No, that's not true. But it's night and day to what it used to be. And having a front row seat to that transformation, watching my amazing colleagues do this fantastic work and being part of it, and other NGOs, filled me with hope and energy. And that's actually part of why I set up CoffeeWatch. I think we can do for coffee what was done for palm oil, right? And even in CoffeeWatch, we're not even 1 year old. We're like 10 months old now. And in just less than 1 year, we managed to get a lot of the coffee industry to stop campaigning against the EUDR, the European Deforestation Regulation, which is a beautiful law that would protect global forests from deforestation, not only for coffee, but also for palm oil and other high-risk commodities. And the coffee industry had been doing very, very bad, pernicious lobbying against the EUDR. And that kind of stopped when we exposed it. And that's fantastic, because actually then a lot of coffee companies came out and said, oh, no, we kind of like the EUDR. We're ready. We can comply. What are you talking about? Why has the industry been lobbying against this? So then the industry groups had to kind of stop doing what they were doing. So that gives me so much hope. I feel filled with optimism.
So I think that's a very positive way to end the podcast. Thank you so much for taking time out to this, and best of luck with all the work you're doing at CoffeeWatch.
You're so kind. Thank you. I'm just so glad that you were interested in coffee. And I'm so happy to be here with you and your listeners. And I believe that together we can make the world a better place with every cup.